It's 2009. Boeing, the most recognizable name in commercial aviation, quietly acquires 17 Airbus jets. Not for research, not for testing. To fly passengers. Think about that for a moment. The company that gave us the 747. The company that put the words, "If it ain't Boeing, I ain't going," into bumper sticker culture. That Boeing bought its rivals' aircraft and then operated them commercially for years. This isn't a rumour. It's documented. It happened, and the reason it happened pulls back a curtain on one of the most underreported strategic disasters in modern aviation business history. There are no crash sites in this story, no mayday calls, but there is a company caught in an impossible position, a fleet of jets that shouldn't exist, and a paper trail that reveals exactly how far an airline will go, how far even Boeing itself will go, when the numbers stop adding up. To understand why Boeing ended up with Airbus jets, you need to understand Singapore Airlines in its prime. In the late 1990s, Singapore Airlines wasn't just an airline, it was the airline, consistently ranked among the world's best, operating some of the most aggressive long-haul routes on the planet, known for service, precision, and, critically, for squeezing every competitive advantage out of its fleet choices. And in 1997, they made a bold bet. They ordered 25 Airbus A340-500s. Now, here's what the A340 was supposed to be. 4 engines, ultra-long range, the aircraft that could fly Singapore to New York non-stop, Singapore to Los Angeles non-stop, routes so long that no twin-engine aircraft of the era was certified to fly them. The pitch was elegant, simple. You want to fly the longest routes in the world? And you need 4 engines. You need this airplane. Singapore Airlines believed it. They signed the contracts. They planned the routes. They built their long-haul premium strategy around this jet. And for a few years, it worked. Their SQ-21 service from Singapore to Newark became the world's longest commercial flight. Passengers paid premium fares to skip the connections. The A340 made it possible. But here's what was quietly happening underneath all of that: the efficiency problem. 4 engines aren't free. Every additional engine is fuel, maintenance, complexity, cost. And through the early 2000s, as jet fuel prices crept upward, Singapore Airlines started watching their long-haul economics very carefully. Meanwhile, Airbus and Boeing were both developing a new generation of long-range twins, the A350, the 787 Dreamliner, are aircraft with 2 engines, modern composite airframes, dramatically better fuel efficiency. And suddenly, the question that nobody at Singapore Airlines wanted to ask became unavoidable. Had they bet on the wrong airplane? This is where the story gets complicated. Because the answer wasn't just yes. The answer was yes, and we're not the only ones who know it. Let's talk about what jet fuel prices actually did to 4-engine economics. In 2000, jet fuel cost roughly 75 cents per gallon. By 2008, the year the global financial crisis hit, it had spiked to over $3.50 per gallon at its peak. That's a 350% increase. Now apply that to an aircraft with 4 CFM56 engines versus a 777-200LR, Boeing's long-range twin, on the same Singapore to New York routing. The A340-500 burns approximately 17,000 to 18,000 kilograms of fuel per hour. The 777-200LR, roughly 12,000 kilograms per hour. Same route, same passengers, 30% more fuel. At 2000 prices, that gap is painful but survivable. At 2008 prices, with a global recession simultaneously destroying premium travel demand, it's existential. Singapore Airlines ran the numbers. They ran them again. The A340-500 fleet, their crown jewel, their record-setting, world's longest flight fleet, was hemorrhaging cash on every departure. The routes were suspended, first temporarily, then, permanently. The A340s were parked, and then came the question that every airline eventually faces with unwanted aircraft. What do we do with them? Here's something the aviation industry doesn't advertise. When a major airline decides to exit a fleet type, especially a niche, expensive, four-engine long-haul type during a global recession, the secondary market can be brutal. Who wants an A340-500 in 2008, in 2009? The economics that made it unworkable for Singapore Airlines made it unworkable for almost everyone. Fuel prices had exposed the aircraft's fundamental operating cost disadvantage. And the airlines that could absorb that disadvantage, Middle Eastern carriers with fuel subsidies for instance, largely had their own fleet strategies already in motion. Singapore Airlines engaged lessors, they talked to brokers, they explored conversion possibilities, and that's when something unusual happened. A buyer emerged, not another airline, not a lessor planning to release them, a Boeing subsidiary. Let's be precise here, because this detail matters. Boeing didn't buy these aircraft through its commercial airplanes division. The purchase came through Altion, Boeing's pilot training subsidiary, and through Boeing's commercial aviation services infrastructure. And the aircraft were acquired and eventually transitioned into service with AirAsia X, the Malaysian long-haul low-cost carrier, under arrangements that involved Boeing Capital Corporation, Boeing's financial services arm. So the picture is more nuanced than the headline suggests. This wasn't Boeing's mainline commercial operation suddenly flying Airbus jets in Boeing livery. It was Boeing's financial and leasing infrastructure facilitating the movement of these aircraft into a new operator's hands. But that raises an even more interesting question. Why was Boeing's money involved at all? To understand this, you need to understand what Boeing Capital Corporation actually does. It's not a charity. It's not in the business of rescuing unwanted Airbus jets out of goodwill. A Boeing Capital invests in aviation assets when doing so serves Boeing's broader strategic interests. So what strategic interest did Boeing have in 17 unwanted Airbus A340-500s? Theory 1, and this is the most widely cited explanation, AirAsia X was a rapidly growing carrier, a carrier that would eventually need to make new aircraft decisions. If Boeing's financial infrastructure helped AirAsia X access these transitional aircraft cheaply, it built a relationship, a debt of goodwill, if you will, that might influence future narrow-body and wide-body purchase decisions. AirAsia's relationship with Airbus for its A320 narrow-body fleet was already deeply entrenched, but long-haul wide-body decisions, that was still in play. Theory 2. Boeing Capital was simply doing what aviation finance does, identifying distressed assets at recession pricing, providing financing solutions, and earning returns on the transaction. Theory 3, and this is where it gets genuinely interesting, is that someone inside Boeing wanted data, not just relationship capital, operational data. The A340-500 represented a specific philosophy about ultra-long-range flight that Boeing had rejected with the 777 family. Having aircraft from that philosophy operating under arrangements where Boeing had financial visibility created a natural comparison point. How did four-engine versus twin-engine economics actually play out in real operations, at real fuel prices, on real routes? Boeing was simultaneously developing the 787 and refining the 777X concept. And understanding the competitive landscape, even through indirect operational exposure to competitor aircraft, had value. We know what the transaction was. The question is, which of these motivations actually drove it? And the honest answer is, probably all three, weighted differently by different people inside Boeing who approved the deal. Airline economics and aircraft manufacturer economics are deeply intertwined in ways that make the Boeing/Airbus rivalry look almost quaint from the outside. Boeing doesn't just make aircraft, it finances them, leases them, trains pilots to fly them, provides maintenance data systems, builds ground support equipment. Airbus does the same. This means that the two companies are perpetually looking for any point of customer contact, any relationship, and any financial arrangement that keeps an airline inside their ecosystem, or that builds a bridge toward their ecosystem. 17 A340-500s, in that context, aren't a contradiction. They're a chess move. After their Singapore Airlines service ended, the A340-500s moved through a series of operators and arrangements. AirAsia X flew several of them on long-haul routes from Kuala Lumpur, including to London and Paris, during the period when the carrier was building its long-haul network. The economics were still challenging. Even at distressed acquisition prices, 4 engines are 4 engines. AirAsia X ultimately transitioned to the A330 for its wide-body operations, a more fuel-efficient twin, and later placed significant orders for the A350. The A340-500s were gradually retired. Some were parted out, some stored in the desert. By the early 2000s, the type was effectively finished as a commercial passenger aircraft. The last scheduled passenger services ended. The economics had spoken. And Boeing's 777-200LR, the aircraft that competed with the A340-500 on ultra-long-haul routes, quietly became the instrument of choice for the routes Singapore Airlines had pioneered. When Singapore Airlines relaunched its non-stop Singapore-New York service in 2018, they used the Airbus A350-900 ULR. But the 777-200LR operates similar ultra-long routes for other carriers today. The competition that the A340-500 lost didn't disappear. It just changed aircraft. The Singapore Airlines lesson. Singapore Airlines is not the villain of this story. They made a rational decision in the late 1990s with the information available. ETOPS regulations, the rules governing how far from an airport twin-engine aircraft can operate, were still evolving. 4 engines genuinely provided a margin of safety and regulatory certainty that twins couldn't match at the time. But the speed of change in both fuel economics and ETOPS certification outpaced their fleet planning assumptions. This is the fundamental risk every airline faces when signing long-term fleet contracts. You're not betting on today's economics. You're betting on 15 years of economics, fuel prices, regulatory environments, competitive dynamics, passenger demand patterns. Singapore Airlines bet on a world where 4 engines remained competitively viable. The world changed faster than the contracts allowed them to adapt. They weren't wrong to make the bet. They were caught by the speed of the change. There's a regulatory dimension to this story that almost never gets discussed. The A340's commercial viability was, or in a meaningful sense, regulated into existence, and then regulated toward extinction. Early ETOPS restrictions meant that long overwater routes genuinely required 4-engine aircraft. The A340 was built for that world. But as twin-engine reliability data accumulated through the 1990s and 2000s, regulators extended ETOPS certification progressively, 180 minutes, 207 minutes, eventually beyond that for specific aircraft engine combinations. Each extension eroded the A340's competitive moat. The aircraft didn't get worse. Its engines didn't become less reliable. The regulatory context that justified its existence simply dissolved around it. This is a pattern that repeats across aviation history. Technologies and aircraft types that are called into existence by one regulatory environment and rendered uneconomic by another. And the question for today's aviation: which current aircraft types are quietly dependent on regulatory contexts that might not persist? I won't name names, but it's worth thinking about. Boeing's involvement in transitioning these Airbus aircraft, even indirectly, even through financial subsidiaries, represented Boeing simultaneously winning and losing. Winning, because the A340-500's commercial failure validated Boeing's twin-engine long-range strategy. The 777 family's economics proved superior, losing because Boeing's own subsequent struggles, the 787 production delays, the 737 MAX crisis, would reveal that being right about aircraft philosophy doesn't protect you from being wrong about execution. Airbus, meanwhile, developed the A350, a twin that effectively conceded the four-engine argument Boeing had been making for years. The two companies converged on the same conclusion through different paths. Four engines for commercial long-haul aviation are economically obsolete. The competition now is entirely about which twin flies farther, cheaper, with more comfort. The A340 was the last serious four-engine commercial challenger, and Boeing, through a quiet financial arrangement in 2009, was there at the end.